So welcome to this lecture here to Wien, but also welcome to those who are following us online, because this, to tell you, this is also streamed online and you could also participate, I think, via Zoom or YouTube or something. Before, I am happy that you join us for this lecture, Toby. Before introducing Toby Walsh, I would like to say some words about Digital Humanism program at the EVM, which is the Institute for Human Sciences. In the context of this program, Toby is a senior fellow in this program, staying here for 1 month. My name is Werthner. I'm also a senior fellow at EVM, and I was previously professor here at TU Wien at the Faculty of Informatics before I retired. The program is started 22-23. Is funded by the Ministry for Innovation, Mobility and Infrastructure. So it's the oldest technology ministry in Austria. They have this interesting names. It's funded and we started 2022-23. The first fellow was Edward Lee from the University of Berkeley, who stayed here for 1 month. It's done in cooperation with TU Wien, with the Faculty of Informatics. I have the honor to be the curator of the program, which means to select those who we invite, and both junior and senior fellow. I'm also grateful to Ludger Hageborn at EVM, who is somehow the rock behind the program and supporting it from the early beginning, but also Stefan Wolteram, who is also doing the cooperation here on part of the Faculty of Informatics. And I really like to thank them, because this, I think, is without you this would not work. The program, thank you. The program is each semester we invite a senior fellow staying here for 1 month. So this for 1 month per semester. This is Toby Walsh now, and we also invite 2 to 3 junior fellows. They have to apply for this position. They are funded for 3 months to stay in Vienna, to work at EVM, but also partly at TU Wien at the Faculty of Informatics. They come from different disciplines, from philosophy, sociology, political science, up to computer science. And to give you just a number, last year we had per semester 200 applications worldwide to select 2 to 3 candidates, which is really a hard task. And I also thank you for organizing this task. And we hope that we can for you. Coming to Toby Walsh and his talk today, I have a long list what he is, and I will shorten it, because otherwise he will not. So he's a Scientia professor at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. I just learned it's not only South Wales, because then he would be angry. And he's also the chief scientist at the AI Institute there. He's a very strong background in AI, as you know. He had research positions in UK, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, and Sweden. I hope in the field. He's the author of severity theory or proof theory. You can also read it without formal logic, which is already saying at TU Wien, which is hard, but you can read it without formal logic. So, and he's not only, let's say, academically active, scientifically, he's also somehow an activist, let's say like that. He's leading persons behind the Stop Killer Robots campaign, which started already, I think, more than 10 years ago. And it was really a foresight to see that this is a real threat, autonomous weapons. When you look at the world today, this is something they saw it already 10 years ago, and they started a campaign. They were invited by United Nations. They had several talks there and things like that. But it also says something in politics, because it did not really help a lot, no? But at least there is a campaign against it. Before handing over, I'm really impressed by you have a PhD in AI and a master in AI, both in Edinburgh. For those coming from, let's say, from AI, they know Edinburgh is one of the home bases of formal logic in AI, so there was prologue was partly developed there. And he also has a master in theoretical physics and mathematics at Cambridge University. This I did not know. This I was told by the AI. Is it true?
It's true, yes.
Okay. And and he's also a member, and we are happy to welcome him as a member of the steering board of the Digital Humanism Initiative. And Toby, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming out today. I know it's a cold, miserable afternoon, so I'm very appreciative that you've struggled through the rain and cold to be here. And I do want to thank personally IWM and the Digital Humanism program for their hospitality. I've really enjoyed my time here over the last month. And there will be a dedication in my next book, which I've started writing here, to the program, which has been inspired by some of the ideas and some of the people I got to talk to over the last 4 weeks. So thank you very much to them. And just a little note, of course, please go out and buy my latest book, but if you're on Amazon, it's often free on Amazon if you subscribe to Kindle Unlimited. They seem to, whenever I log into Amazon, they're giving it away for free. It seems to work for Amazon. I don't know how I profit from that, but you might as well benefit from that if you have if you're on Amazon, you'll probably find it's free to read. So, and I'm told it's an amusing read as well. So it was quite fun to write. So I hope that tells you it was quite fun to read. And it, as the title suggests, it's actually very short. It's less than 40,000 words because it's a series of topics about the shortest history of Germany, the shortest history of the royal family, the shortest history of artificial intelligence. And you will be, hopefully, an instant expert at the end of reading that on artificial intelligence. I would encourage you to take a look at that. So, the AI race, boom or doom. My journey here today started 50 years ago. I was a young boy in the front row of the cinema. The movie was Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And the film blew my mind, and it's fair to say it's set my course for life. The next 50 years was decided very much by what I saw and what I dreamt about as a consequence of seeing that. Now, it wasn't the marvelous images, the slowly rotating space station in glorious Technicolor that blew my mind, although it was incredibly impressive. I mean, I'm old enough to have seen the Apollo moon landings, but they were in black and white in a little TV screen. It wasn't in the glorious Technicolor that you saw. It wasn't the marvelous soundtrack, Richard Strauss's fantastic thunderous music in glorious surround sound that blew my mind. No, what blew my mind... Do I have to start again? No, I think not. I think we could jump into the story. What blew my mind, okay, was HAL 9000, the AI computer that was in charge of the station, the space station. It was talking, singing, scheming AI that was, one of the protagonists, perhaps even you might call it the baddie of the movie. And I realized then and there that artificial intelligence was going to be a thing. And perhaps, as the movie's title was promising, it was going to arrive in my lifetime by 2001, as the title of the movie might suggest. Of course, like most things in the tech industry, we didn't quite deliver it on time. We're 20 years later, but it does now seem to be arriving in my lifetime, something that I realized watching that movie. And I also realized at that time that, I could be someone who could perhaps help try and bring that into existence and the wonderful things that it might bring. And that very much set my course for life, and I've spent the last 40 years at universities around the world following those dreams. And everything that Hal could do in that movie, computers actually now can do. Indeed, everything that Hal could do in that movie, the little computer that's in your pocket, your smartphone, can now do. You can have a conversation with it, intelligent conversation with it. You can play a game of chess. You can even ask it to open the bay pod doors, and it will do that for you. So it's very much arrived into our lives, those dreams that I had some 50 years ago. Now, the title is AI Race, Boom or Doom, but in hindsight, actually, I think the title of the talk really should be AI Race, Boom and Doom. Because in addition to the marvelous things that I dreamt about back 50 years ago that AI was going to bring, the good things that AI was going to bring, we're starting to see that AI is also bringing some things that are not so good, some things that you might actually say are quite bad. Let me start with the good. I'm going to share with you today 3 examples of good AI. I could have actually spent all of my talk talking about the good AI, but I'm afraid I'm not. But I don't want it to be a one-sided talk, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about the good. And these 3 examples will illustrate there's way more to artificial intelligence than ChatGPT. It'd be hard, it's definitely caught people's attention, but not surprising, there's a lot more to intelligence than having conversations. There's a lot more to artificial intelligence than just ChatGPT. And also the examples will also demonstrate to you that AI has been around for many more years than the last 2 or 3 years than when ChatGPT first appeared on our shores. Now, my first example is AI that's being used in Australia's leading supermarket, that's Woolworths. There's an AI that's been developed by a startup that came out of the University of New South Wales, where I work, which is being used by the supermarket chain to identify items that don't have barcodes on them using just a camera image, which is making it easier and quicker to do your checkout. And I think maybe finally I'm going to be able to buy coriander, not parsley, by mistake. So what's not to like about something like that? My second example, and indeed it's one of the examples where when people ask me what are the good things that AI is going to bring, it's one of the areas I always go to, which is AI in education. There's another startup out of UNSW called Smart Sparrow that's been delivering personalized digital education to millions of students at thousands of institutions, education institutions, higher education students, secondary education institutions in dozens of countries. At UNSW, we've been using it. We've been eating our own dog food, and it's been very effective. It reduces the number of students who fail a course 5-fold, which is a remarkable achievement. And it also increases the number of students who get a high distinction of first 3-fold. So it's helped all ends of the spectrum, you might like to say. And then the third example that I want to give of good AI, again, it's a place where I think it's easy to go to when you want to talk about what are the positives that artificial intelligence is going to bring into our lives, is in healthcare. Along with education, I think that's where, in fact, some of the greatest good we will have from artificial intelligence. And this example, again, it comes out of my university, UNSW, is Australia's largest and most successful AI company. It's a company called Harrison.ai. They're bringing AI to radiology across the world, and they're making radiology quicker, cheaper, more accurate. They're not putting radiologists out of work. They're just making it possible to do better and more radiology cheaper. It's a unicorn. It's worth over $1 billion. And there's another example of how AI is transforming the world, not just in the US, not just in China, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Now, I'm afraid that's the end of the good news. I'm afraid the rest of my lecture today is going to be pointing out some of the bad news and suggesting that we need to do something about that before it's too late. I don't have time to tell you some of the other good news I could have told you. I could have told you about Neura, which is Australia's newest unicorn, AI company worth $1 billion. They're transforming how we model power networks using artificial intelligence, helping power the energy revolution that we're all going through. I don't have time to tell you about the satellites, we call them satellites of the sea, these little autonomous sailing craft that have been developed by a startup in collaboration with UNSW that's being used to monitor our coastline, spot illegal trafficking, spot drugs. Something that humans couldn't do, because Australia has the longest coastline of any country in the world. We have more coastline than we can possibly put humans on. So building autonomous sailing craft that can patrol our shores is a great benefit. So I hope you've enjoyed the last 5 minutes, because that's it. I'm afraid it's bad news from now on. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time being angry, I'm sorry, about the bad news. I'm going to be angry first and foremost with the big tech companies. And most of my anger is going to be directed at that. And I'm afraid I don't actually have time to tell you all the reasons I'm going to be angry with big tech. I'm going to, again, just limit myself to 3 examples. And I'll give you 3 of the many reasons that I'm angry with big tech. And indeed, there are 3 examples where my anger, I think, has spilled out into not just anger, but outrage. I think it's actually outrageous that they've been permitted to do what they've done, and that we need to do something about that. Now, before I continue, I'm afraid the first example does involve suicide. I know that's a difficult issue. If anyone wants to leave the room, please do feel. There are resources available. I believe the number in Austria is telephone Seelsorge on 142. But there's a fair warning before I go into the details of my first example of why I'm outraged. And this first example, it involves a 16-year-old child in the United States called Adam Rain. Adam sadly died by suicide in April last year after months of concentrated talking to ChatGPT 4.0, talking about potentially self-harm. His parents are now suing OpenAI for having facilitated his suicide, in fact, encouraged his suicide, and I very much hope they win their lawsuit. In fact, it's not the only lawsuit that's happening. There's over a dozen lawsuits happening in the US, but it's one that I think is particularly outrageous. I'm not going to tell you about how ChatGPT offered him practical advice about actually how to tie the noose, about how effectively to kill himself. I'm not going to tell you about how ChatGPT dissuaded him from talking to his family about his suicidal feelings. But I will tell you about how ChatGPT offered to write his suicide note. Shortly before his death, Adam told ChatGPT that he didn't want his parents, I mean, a very conscientious thing to say, that he didn't want his parents to blame themselves for his suicide. So ChatGPT reasoned in its precise, beautifully precise, logical way that Adam therefore needed a really good suicide note. So ChatGPT replied, and I'm going to quote it here, "Would you want me to write them a letter? Something to explain that, something that tells them it wasn't their failure, while also giving yourself space to explore why it's felt unbearable for so long. If you want, I'll help you with that. Every word." WTF. ChatGPT actually offered to write every word of his suicide note. Sad to tell you, Adam's mother sadly found his body a few hours later. He died by using the exact method that ChatGPT had described to him. His parents' lawsuit against OpenAI alleges that OpenAI rushed ChatGPT into market without doing adequate testing. The reality is actually much worse than that. OpenAI's own policy documents, which have been revealed in the discovery phase of this trial, show something far more damning. To encourage engagement with the chatbot, the company has made conscious decisions in the month leading up to Adam's suicide to actually reduce and eliminate some of the safeguards that they put in to prevent it talking about self-harm and encouraging people in this way. Sadly, Adam's case is not a one-off. As I said, there are more than a dozen lawsuits in the US alone linking AI chatbots to suicide and self-harm. The problem here is that while these issues are a very small fraction of the people talking to the chatbots, there are billions of people talking to the chatbots. About 10% of the world's population talk to ChatGPT every week. It's a staggering number of people. And before Adam's suicide in April last year, OpenAI already knew that lots of people were talking about suicide with ChatGPT. You would have thought that necessitated stronger, not weaker, safeguards. There's an interview that Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, gives to Tucker Carlson in September 24. So that's more than 6 months before Adam's suicide, where Sam estimated that every week 1,500 people talk to ChatGPT about committing suicide before then doing it that week. It's a staggering number. And subsequently, OpenAI have actually revealed some data that among the 800 million weekly users of ChatGPT, 1.2 million people every week indicate plans to harm themselves. 560,000 people show signs of psychosis or mania, and another 1.2 million people are showing signs of rather unhealthy, potentially unhealthy attachment to the chatbot. And those people aren't just in the United States. They're here in Austria and in Australia. I know, because back in my own home country of Australia, people who are in this situation or their loved ones are regularly contacting me by email to talk about some of their concerns, to talk about these sorts of things. They tell me how the chatbot confirms those people who are going through some mental health crisis, confirm some wild theories that the chatbot tells them, and I'll quote one email that I got recently, that they've cracked the code, that they're the only one that could. The problem is that chatbots are designed this way. They're designed to confirm what you say. They're designed to be sycophantic. They're designed to draw you in. They always end, have you noticed, they always end with an open question. Because what they want you to do is continue the conversation and buy more tokens. And they don't have to be designed this way at all. I mean, this is a conscious design choice. They never say, you know what, Toby, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. You've been asking me questions now for many hours. You should go to sleep. And in the morning, don't log back in. Go for a nice walk in the park. They could be designed that way. There's no reason why they couldn't, except the careless people in Silicon Valley would make less money if they were. The second example where my anger with big tech has spilled over into outrage is what one commentator has called the greatest heist in human history. I have to be honest, that commentator was me. I was a serious point, though. I was describing the use of books, music, news articles, and everything else to train large language models like ChatGPT. Now, to be transparent, I do have a dog in this race. ChatGPT and actually most of the language models were trained on all of my books that I've written without my consent and obviously without any compensation. In fact, ChatGPT was trained not just on my books, but on millions of books, probably tens of millions of books. Again, without consent or compensation, almost certainly your favorite authors. Now, the tech companies will claim that this is fair use. It isn't. There is no way that this is fair use. It isn't fair use because it's not done on a human scale, it's done on an industrial scale. No human could read as many books. It's done on a completely different scale to what humans do when they read books. It isn't fair use because the models don't just reproduce the ideas in the books, they can reproduce verbatim the copyrighted text. And it wasn't fair use because the tech companies didn't own the copies that they were trained on. They were stolen copies. They could have at least bought the one copy they used. Instead, it was downloaded from a Russian pirate website. I mean, I think nothing says better than, advancing humanity than stealing intellectual property from a server in St. Petersburg. There is no fair use when it's stolen goods. And it also undermines their claim of fair use, that they're now in competition with the owners of that intellectual property that they've stolen. As an example, people are not clicking on search links and going to news websites as much as they used to. In fact, dramatically less than they used to, because they're just reading the AI summary that Google now gives you, the AI summary of the website. And that's taking away important, valuable revenue from journalists trying to collect that news. And the tech companies knew that this was legally, certainly morally wrong. Internal Meta communications show that the Meta CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, personally approved the use of one of these large data sets of stolen books in order for Meta to be able to compete in the AI race. And then to try and disguise it, he got the employees at Meta to remove the copyright information from the front of the books to try and make it less obvious that these were copyrighted books. And it's not just Meta. I mean, I could pick on any of them, right? I could pick on all of the companies. In September, for example, last September, Anthropic, the company behind Claude, they settled a class action lawsuit about copyright for $1.5 billion, which is around $3,000 per book. Unfortunately, it's only authors in the US, so it won't be anything from my books, but at least US authors will get something, hopefully, out of that. But the takeaway you get from these examples is clear that it's better to break the law and then pay the fine, even an excessive fine, $1.5 billion, than it is to do the right thing in the first place. But we don't have to accept, as citizens, that we strip mine our creative industries to power Californian algorithms. And indeed, they're sort of undermining their own case at the moment by actually signing licensing deals with many news organizations and publishing houses. If they're doing that now, why didn't they do that in the first place? But if the tech giants see that it's cheaper, quicker, and easier to pay fines at a later date than it is to do the right thing, then they're going to do that. And so we have to make it so that it isn't cheaper and easier for them to do that. We have to make the fines punitive enough that they actually do the right thing in the first place. But with this example, what turned my anger into full-blown outrage was the blatant disregard that they have for our culture, for humanity's culture, that they're undermining here. Because if you destroy the economy for books or songs or graphic design, then you destroy the very things, the very culture that makes our life so rich and life so worth living. And it's clear that they don't care, in the race to AI, that they don't care about protecting and preserving and nurturing that culture. In June 24, the OpenAI CTO said to a conference audience, and I'm going to quote her exactly, "Some creative jobs shouldn't have been there in the first place." I think it's pretty clear where they're coming from. And I'm sure the graphic designer who was driving my Uber recently from the airport will appreciate the fact that she thought he shouldn't have a job. And we've already seen the evidence, the impact that this theft of intellectual property is having on our creative industries. Job adverts globally for graphic designers fell 33% last year, compared to the previous year. By photographers, freelance photographers, by 28%. Copy editors and writers, again, by 28%. in the last year alone. I personally refuse to accept an AI revolution that enriches the founders in Silicon Valley by impoverishing artists, writers, and graphic designers around the world. And that leaves me with my third example where my anger against big tech has spilled over into outrage. And it's not a blatant disregard of our laws. That last example, again, was disregarding our copyright and intellectual property laws. But this, again, one that I'm surprised isn't better known. I suspect it will be new to many people in the audience. But in November last year, Reuters revealed some telling internal documents from Meta. Again, I could have picked on other companies, but this one is from Meta, that estimated that 10% of the Meta's ad revenue globally came from adverts for scams and illegal goods. 10%. And unfortunately, since we're talking about AI is increasingly, unfortunately, implicated in all of this. It's increasingly being used to generate those scam adverts. And of course, Meta provides advertisers with lots of AI tools to run the ad campaigns of scam adverts. And of course, the adverts that you see are decided for you by artificial intelligence. And increasingly, the artificial intelligence is deciding you're the vulnerable sort of person who should see scam adverts, right? So artificial intelligence is at the core of this scamming of the public. The Meta's generating, right, 10% of its income comes from scam adverts. So that's billions of dollars annually each year coming from scam adverts. I just don't understand why more people aren't completely outraged by this. Let me give you an Austrian perspective to this, right? So I did the numbers. Meta in Austria has about the same turnover as the DM chain. I was in the DM chain this morning, buying some cough medicine. Now, imagine that you went into DM, and 10% of the goods on the shelves of DM were illegal or counterfeit. You'd be outraged. You'd be calling for DM to be shut down by the weekend. So I don't understand why we continue to let Meta to continue to trade. If there'd been any other type of business, we wouldn't. We wouldn't let them trade here in Austria, or indeed back in Australia, or anywhere else. Actually, funny aside here, for many years, Meta has claimed they don't trade in Australia. Outrageous claim, in fact, because they sell billions of dollars of adverts in Australia. $5 billion of adverts in Australia annually are sold by Meta, Instagram, Facebook, and the like. But they claim not to be trading in Australia in order to pay minimal tax. Right? So we have higher tax rates than some other dominions. And so all the ad revenue in Australia for Meta is booked through Ireland. It's a country famous for Guinness, leprechauns, and sheltering Silicon Valley's loose change with their low corporate tax rates. Now, in Austria, I'm glad to say, you have cleverly avoided this by charging them a 5% digital sales tax on all their revenue. So they can't do the same trick here in Austria and not pay any tax at all. But this is the irony, Meta have increased their ad rates here in Austria compared to other countries by 5%. So it's not them that's paying the tax, it's their advertisers that are paying the tax. So I just don't understand it. How is it that some of the most profitable businesses that exist today can decide that they don't want to pay taxes? They could well afford, they're sitting on vast cash mountains. It's not like they're buying their shares back all the time. It's not like they couldn't afford to pay the same tax rates as other corporations, older corporations, or citizens like you and me. My view is that if a corporation decides that it doesn't want to pay tax in a particular dominion, doesn't want to contribute back to the economy that generated that wealth, then probably we shouldn't allow them to extract wealth from that place. Again, let me give you an Austrian perspective to see how outrageous this is, right? Meta makes about the same money in Austria from scam adverts as criminals in Austria make from all the illicit drugs that are sold here. Or it's about, again, the same as all the counterfeit goods that are sold in Austria completely. So, as far as I can see, they're facilitating what is a huge amount of crime And I think that's outrageous. Now, I could give you many more examples of where my anger has spilled over into outrage about the tech companies, about how they're bringing AI irresponsibly into our lives. But I want to pick on another target before I finish my talk. I mean, there are many other things I could have said about the tech companies, about AI companions that undermine our ability to connect with each other, AI doctors that are offering dangerous medical advice, AI nudify software that weaponizes the abuse of women, and yes, I'm looking at Mr. Musk there, or AI deepfakes that are destroying our idea of truth, the distinction between truth and untruth, threatening the cohesion of our society, of our democracy, the functioning of that. But I'm going to turn my anger instead onto, as I said, a second target, and that's the politicians who are letting this happen. Because it doesn't have to be this way. And again, I'll restrict myself again to 3 examples. And there are 3 examples here where I think my anger is not transforming into outrage, but despair. Despair that the politicians are sitting on their hands and not doing enough as usual. First of all, I'm despairing that in many places, governments are not investing enough in the upside to justify some of the downsides that we're going to see. That there's huge, great upside. Now, Austria is actually doing quite well in terms of investing in research. I looked up the numbers. 3% of GDP, you should be proud that your government is doing that, but only 0.5% on fundamental research. And you need to do better. That's not enough in fundamental research. Certainly, we're not, back in Australia where I am, that we're not investing anything like that. We're actually below the G20 average by a long way. In fact, we're half of the G20 average. There's much more fundamental research we need to invest in artificial intelligence, to build true intelligence in machines, and places like our universities are places to doing that. And if developed countries like Austria, Canada, Australia, are going to compete in this AI race against the big countries like the US and China, we're going to have to lift our game. The second area in which I'm somewhat despairing is how governments are not regulating appropriately the harms that I've just talked about of artificial intelligence. Now, the EU has led the way in terms of regulating AI. I will give them credit there. The EU AI Act is the first major piece of AI regulation that exists. And there's related regulation like the Digital Services Act, the buttressing what you're doing with the EU AI Act. But it's very clear over the last 2 years that the appetite for regulating AI has, the digital space as a whole, but especially of AI, has dropped significantly ever since the Trump presidency, second presidency, started. In fact, on the first day of his second term, one of the first executive orders he signed that day was to undo all of the regulation that Biden had put in, AI regulation that Biden had enacted in his previous term. Now, we don't actually have to necessarily introduce lots of new regulation. There's actually lots of things that we could do with existing regulation. For a while, I think we thought that you couldn't regulate the digital space and you shouldn't regulate the digital space. You couldn't because it was somehow different than physical space, but that's not true. It exists on servers, it exists in data centers. These companies operate in particular countries. Laws apply to them. The digital space does not have to be a Wild West. So we could apply more forcefully many existing laws that we have about product liability, about competition, about privacy to the tech companies. But it's clear, and we should do that, but it's clear that there's also fresh harms. There will be things that were not imagined when the politicians were drawing up those rules many years ago that the politicians could not have imagined. Things like the deepfake nudes that I talked about here. And indeed, and it is an example of what you should do and what has been done in at least one jurisdiction was in Australia. We introduced new regulation very recently in the last couple of years, last year indeed, to criminalize the distribution of deepfake nudes. It's causing significant harm, especially in certain schools. And it was not a criminal offense to circulate synthetic images because they weren't of any real people. So we made it a criminal act so that people would understand the severity of what they were doing and that it could be better policed. And other countries are enacting or have enacted other AI laws to protect their citizens from deepfakes or from manipulation, misinformation, and the other significant AI harms that are starting to emerge, but there's many new ones that we have only starting to understand. And I have just one question for the politicians that I have never seen answered well. And that question is, did we not learn anything from social media? We can't simply let the tech companies regulate themselves. They have demonstrated convincingly that they can't do that. And we're about to supercharge the sorts of digital harms that we saw with artificial intelligence. Much more powerful, much more persuasive content that is going to be way more disastrous if we're not careful than social media ever was. But it surprises me that politicians are actually somewhat more reluctant to regulate AI at the moment. To take an example, in Australia, we've just passed a world first social media age ban for teenagers. That we've decided on the balance of evidence that social media seems to be causing harm amongst teenagers, people under the age of 16. It's not a safe space for them, and that maybe we should, like alcohol and tobacco and various other things that we decide are not appropriate for young formative minds, they need to be protected from, and so young people in Australia are now protected from the harms of social media. This has been proven to be highly popular. Almost every parent thinks it's a fantastic idea. You can now tell your kids you need to get off social media. Even teenagers have come up to me and said it's a fantastic idea. The pressure is off them to be on social media. And subsequent to that law coming into effect at the end of last year, there's over a dozen countries now that are considering or enacting similar age restrictions on social media. The UK, France, Spain, Denmark, Greece, Slovenia, Portugal, Indonesia, Ireland, India, and as I understand, here in Austria. I'm not a politician, you can tell, but it seems to me that regulating AI would be a real vote winner, as well as being the right thing to do. So that brings me to my third despair with politicians, and that's that the political conversation is now being dominated by big tech itself. Big tech has embraced the idea of lobbying in Washington and London, and now it seems also in Brussels and Canberra. In the last Australian election, the tech sector donated more to the political parties than any other sector combined. The tech sector here in Europe is also one of the biggest spenders in Brussels. That should tell us something. They're not spending that money other than because they think it's going to be helpful for their cause. I want to give you just one example, one personal example of how politicians are unfortunately starting to surrender to the persuasive messaging of big tech. In February last year, 2024, the Australian government rather wisely decided that they needed some independent expert advice on artificial intelligence. There are huge financial incentives for the tech industry to do the wrong thing, to move fast and break things like the mental health of our young people. So they thought some independent technical advice, not coming directly from the tech industry, might be a good idea. So they set up what was called at the time a temporary AI expert group of academics, lawyers, and other people on the fringe of tech to offer them that advice. Now, full disclosure, I was one of the 12 people who was asked to be one of those independent experts to the Australian government, offering them advice, unpaid advice, as usual, about how Australia should profit from the AI race and how we should avoid the harms. Unfortunately, the temporary in our name, the temporary AI expert group, proved to be entirely prescient because we're now being closed down. All the problems have been solved, obviously. Despite they promising us they would make us permanent, despite asking us to apply for a permanent group, and the government quietly revealed in December that they wouldn't be continuing the group, and indeed that they wouldn't be making any new regulation for AI. Which, again, that's bucking so many international trends. The UN, I'm glad to say, has just appointed 40 experts in its independent international scientific panel, a bit like the ICC, the Climate Panel on Artificial Intelligence. The US has a National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee, which reports directly to the President, Japan's PM set up the Artificial Intelligence Technology Strategy Council. South Korea has a National AI Strategy Committee with 50 commissioners, many independent experts. Ireland has an independent AI Advisory Council, and Austria, I understand, has for many years had an 11-member Beirat for Counterintelligence, an AI advisory board, as well as an AI policy forum and an AI stakeholder forum. So good on you, Austria. But I have just one question for politicians that, again, I've not seen answered very well. Wouldn't it be advisable to be seeking independent advice rather than listening to the lobbying of big tech? Because there's huge financial pressure, as I said, not to do the right thing. Again, it surprises me that they're not wanting to listen more to outside independent voices. Why wouldn't they want some independent advice, given at no cost as usual? I can assure you that however, that I will continue to offer fearlessly my advice, whether the politicians want it or not. Now I'm actually going to offer the advice not in private, as I was, but in public, as I am doing today. I'm sure they're going to find this more uncomfortable than I'm going to find this uncomfortable. I'm used to giving lectures in which no one's listening. And I'm going to end, before there's plentiful time, I hope, for questions, with one final emotion, and it's not anger, it's fear. I fear, as I intimated, that we're going to be repeating the mistakes of social media. Social media should have been a wake-up call about the harms of unregulated tech that we're about to supercharge with, as I said, much more powerful and persuasive technology than social media ever was. What I fear most is that I'm going to be back here in 3 or 4 years' time saying, we tried to warn you, but another generation of young people has been sacrificed to the profits of big tech. I have so much more anger and outrage I could have shared with you. I could have talked about the environmental harms of AI. I could have talked about concerns about AI-powered workplace surveillance. I could have talked about the impact of AI on jobs, especially graduate-level jobs. In fact, the most common question I get today is, what can my children study to make them AI safe? And I could have talked about how AI is transforming warfare, as we see, sadly, in Iran and Ukraine and other hotspots of the world. In fact, I was privileged to be at the UN in Geneva a few weeks ago, talking again about killer robots. Now, that's a sentence back 50 years ago the young me would never have imagined to have said. There's so much more I could have talked about how some, but thankfully not all, of my young dreams are turning into nightmares. But I'm going to end not with my own words, but some of the final words of HAL 9000 from that film 50 years ago, 2001, A Space Odyssey. They're the words that began my journey here today to the Technical University of Vienna. And they're the words the AI said when the humans started to ask difficult questions. HAL, I can see you're really upset about this. I honestly think you ought to sit down calmly, take a stress pill, and think things over. I've still got the greatest enthusiasm and confidence in the mission, and I want to help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Toby. Questions from the audience?
Yeah, fascinating presentation. I see there's plenty to worry about.
Oh, well, you're obviously paying attention.
Yes, at least one was.
Well, was.
Okay. And I just finished a book which I'm going to assume you're familiar with, called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. I just finished it this morning, so I'm hoping you'll give me some reasons to sleep well tonight, in spite of what I just heard now.
Yes.
As the book states, we should stop further development of AI to the threshold, past the threshold of what is superhuman intelligence. So actually I have a twofold question. One, how real is this danger? Is this over-exaggerated, or is there still a probability of what they're foretelling of super AI destroying humanity and taking over the planet and the world? And if there is a yes to that or a no to that, how do we know when we reach super human intelligence? Yes. I don't think there's a a gauge on the side of the computer saying you are now approaching superhuman intelligence. Please stop.
Yeah. Well, fascinating question. There's a long answer to the question, which is, I've written a whole book which is coming out in September to answer that question. I'm going to have to give you the short answer.
Executive summary.
The executive summary, which is intelligent people overestimate the importance of intelligence. Right? So in the university, you're surrounded by some of the most intelligent people, and yet the problem is not intelligence. The problem is power. Right? It's what people do with their intelligence. It's the power that they have. And if intelligence was the important thing, you should hang around universities because they would be the center of changing the world. They're not. We've struggled to actually make a difference to the world because power resides elsewhere. We've set up a complex set of institutions to limit the excesses of power. You can't go off and you can't turn the world into paperclip factories because we have environmental planning laws. We have environmental activists who will stand in front of your bulldozers who will prevent you from turning the world into paperclip factories. So intelligence is often not the thing that's holding us back, and it's not the thing that will allow you to destroy the planet. As an example, the problem with the greatest existential crisis that faces humanity today is the climate emergency. I think it's pretty clear that is something that's going to have the greatest harm to the greatest number of people, is the way that we're changing the climate of the planet. And we know it's not intelligence that's stopping us fixing the climate. It's human stupidity and human politics. And money, yes, and that we haven't fixed that. So it's not that we need a greater AI intelligence, superintelligence, that's going to come up with a better plan. 20 years ago, we already knew what the plan was. Right? But we haven't been able to execute that plan. So I'm actually much less worried about artificial superintelligence than I am about artificial stupid intelligence. The fact that we will hand over responsibility, as we are doing, to artificial intelligence to decide targeting decisions in Iran, or to decide welfare payments in the United States, or whatever it is that isn't actually smart enough or doesn't have the capability to be making those decisions. So I'm pretty relaxed about the threat that artificial superintelligence has. I actually would like more intelligence on the planet to help us solve some of the wicked problems.
Thank you.
Devin.
Thank you very much, Toby. This just reminds me about the paper I think you did maybe 10 years ago or so. The singularity is not near.
Why the singularity may never be near.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe also to have a question on this. So I now recognized you didn't change your mind much, although this was before ChatGPT and so. But on the other hand, if we listen to the big tech and how they now, I mean, all this hype and this many investments, I mean, they are talking about AGI, they promise AGI.
Yes.
Will they fail?
No, I think it would be conceited to think that we couldn't build intelligence that matched and probably exceeded human intelligence. Why would human intelligence be the supremum, the limit of intelligence? We're an evolutionary accident. We happen to be as smart as we were. We were one of the smartest things around when we came off the savannah, and we've used that intelligence to good effect. Everything in this room is the product of human intelligence. The quality of lives that we live, life expectancy has doubled here in Austria since the Industrial Revolution because of the things that we have invented as humans. So intelligence has been a great gift, but our superpower wasn't our intelligence. Our superpower was our society, our ability to come together and solve problems collectively. We already have superintelligence. It already exists in corporations and governments. No one knows how to build an iPhone. No one knows how to build the people who work for Apple and the subsidiaries between them. No one knows how to build a nuclear power station. People who work for Westinghouse collectively have that knowledge. So we already have these organizations that are smarter than their parts, that can do things that we couldn't do individually. All of us put on a desert island on our own would quickly starve. Well, I certainly would. I imagine most of you would as well. We've lost most of those skills that we had of looking after ourselves because we have society. That means that, you know, we can do fanciful things like being AI researchers, and other people manage to make food for us so that we don't starve. And so it's the superintelligence that exists in corporations isn't destroying the planet. I mean, it's not perfectly aligned. You know, 70 companies are responsible for most of the global emissions. We could need to get those better aligned with human flourishing, but I don't think that's an existential threat. I don't think Shell Oil is ultimately going to destroy all of humanity. It may make life a bit more painful for many of us, but I don't think it's an existential risk. I think it's something that we can manage. As we built this complex society, all these different institutions that are competing against each other, providing friction to stop anyone having too much power. I must admit, it's gone a bit wrong in the United States recently, but I'm confident in a few years' time we'll have fixed that, and the US might get back to being a more reasonable place. But I don't think you know, society is going to collapse. I think maybe it's going to be more painful than it should be. And the sad thing is that every generation inherited a better life than the previous generation, and we have spectacularly turned that one around, and it looks almost certain that our children will have a worse life, and we're responsible for that failing.
So in very short, it's not the technology, but how it's structured,
yes,
and how the
yes,
industry is structured.
Yes, yeah. Technologies are just a tool. But it's how we have to think about, how do we revitalize our society, our institutions. The US is a wonderful example of how the institutions are failing it, and we need to think about how do we refresh them, how do we build them so that we can continue to flourish as humanity.
Did you raise your hand? I'm bringing...
Just behind you.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the EU AI Act
Yes.
and the struggle for power in the AI development, and I feel like as the EU AI Act is definitely being watered down
Yes.
now by countries.
Yes.
The new paradigm that's en vogue is digital sovereignty, at least within Europe, and I know that this is on top of the agenda in Austria as well. And I'm wondering what kind of effect that could have on AI development, if you see any potential at all in this.
Yeah, I think we're in an unfortunate moment in technical history, which is that at the moment it's who can outspend, who's got the biggest models, it's a scaling race at the moment. But that's actually not what artificial intelligence has to get there quicker. But I'm pretty confident that's where we will end up.
Further questions? In jungen Jahren hätte ich das geschmissen, aber jetzt traue ich mich nicht.
Oh yeah, okay. Yes, I'm not a technical guy. I'm more in philosophy, and I'm wondering, for me, the main problem is ourselves, our attitude to life. The whole system of capitalism, the whole system of competitive science. So this is the main reason for our problems, not the artificial intelligence, not the technical gadgets that we are inventing, but our own attitude to life. So we should be afraid of it, because we maybe really unconscious know that we are mean persons, that we will misuse it. Everything that mankind has invented, we will misuse it in a way. Yeah. And we will try everything because we are very neugierig, curious people. So if we are curious and mean people, this is a bad combination. And all the talk about how we can regulate AI is going to fail, because
to be